Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. In the name of Allah, most gracious, ever merciful. Assalamu alaikum. Peace and blessings of Allah be upon you, dear. And a very warm welcome to today's Study Skills Surgery organized by the National Talim Department UK. My name is Waqar Ahmed Ahmadi, and I have the honor of being your host today. In this forum, we'll be looking at some of the vital skills that students should have to support and enhance their learning. This, of course, is very pertinent in the context of another national lockdown, during which schools have been closed to the majority of pupils and classroom teaching has been replaced by remote education. Many lessons in all subjects across all stages of education have been taking place on virtual platforms such as Microsoft Teams and Google Classroom. However, the lockdown has also had a major impact in other ways, including student well-being, obstacles to learning at home, and the cancellation of GCSE and A-level examinations last summer. Inevitably, all this has changed the way that teaching and learning is taking place. Today's forum provides us an opportunity to discuss this and to share very practical ideas and strategies for how to overcome the many challenges being faced by students of all ages everywhere. For this purpose, we are very fortunate to have a very distinguished panel of educators and students who I will now introduce. Today, we also have the honor of being joined by Sophia Ahmed Sahiba, who is a teacher, educational consultant, and writer. She is a former head teacher and is part of the UK Lajna Imaila's Special Educational Needs and Disability Team, which has also been working closely with Nazarat Talim in Rabwa in Pakistan, supporting the special needs school there. We're also joined by Shuaibuddin Ahmed, who is a curriculum leader of computer science at Carshalton High School for Girls in Surrey. He also serves as an assistant in the National Talim Department and as the Sanat Tijarat or Trade and Industry Secretary in his local Jamaat. We're also joined by Luqman Bajwa, who is serving in Majlis Khudam Ahmadiyya UK as Muhtamim Amure Tuluba, that is Student Affairs. As part of this role, he helps to coordinate the work of the Ahmadiyya Muslim Students Association and the Ahmadiyya Muslim Research Association. We're also joined by Rameen Sahiba, who is currently in year 12 studying A-levels in biology, chemistry, maths, and further maths, and who's also doing an extended project qualification course. She is a researcher and trainee producer for the Voice of Islam breakfast show. Last year, she passed her GCSEs with flying colors, achieving level 9 of her subjects, mashallah. And last but not least, we're also joined by Taha Nadeem, who is a student from New Malden, who last year achieved top grades in his A-levels in biology, chemistry, and economics. He will be starting a degree in medicine at university this September, inshallah. He is part of the UK Talim team and also serves in Majlis Khudam Ahmadiyya, including as local Nazim Amur Tulaba. So we do obviously indeed have very esteemed guests with us today. And as well as us hearing from our panel, we'd also like to hear from you, the viewers, and welcome your questions and comments during the course of the program. If you would like to ask a question, please type those into the live chat, and we will endeavor to include as many as possible in the course of the program. So let's get straight into the discussion. We will start by looking briefly at the importance of education and explore what Islam teaches about acquiring knowledge. So if I could please turn to you first, Sophia Sahiba. How are religion and education linked, and does Islam offer any guidance on this?
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, and welcome to this segment. So we're going to touch very quickly on the importance and relevance of education, particularly, as you said, Farzab, in light of Islamic teachings. Now, before I start, I want to point out that when I refer to education in my very small talk, I'm referring to all the acquirement of all skills and all knowledge, not simply gaining 100% in exams and tests and book learning, which is wonderful, but it's not reflective of all learners. So the word knowledge or ilm encompasses a plethora of skill sets and strengths, and it's all inclusive to every type of learning when we talk about knowledge. Let me start by just throwing some facts and for everybody to have a little think about. There are 2.2 billion children on this earth. 260 million children all over the world cannot access education. 2/3 of the world child population will finish only primary school, but will not reach minimum proficiency levels in reading. 60% of 137 million adolescents are in school but not learning. And finally, in countries affected by conflict, 2/3 of adolescents are out of school. So in a world where there are such huge social, political and economic disparities and a lack of basic human rights such as gender equality, racial equality, alleviation of poverty, access to healthcare and clean water, what does Islam say about education and its relevance to wider society and such societal issues? When I first started thinking and mulling over what I would say today and how I could make this small talk interesting for those who listened, I knew that at its core, the relationship between Islam and education was based on the fundamental principles of Adl, Ihsan, and Itaiz al-Qurba, which are the principles of justice. So before I started writing, I said a very small prayer, but it was very important. I said, Rabbi zidni ilma, which means, oh Lord, increase me in my knowledge. And then I got my mouse, opened my computer, and the first click that I did on the first website, I read a quote that said, education is the right of an individual and the duty of the state. And I want us all to think about that word duty. And I often find that when I'm preparing for a lesson or a lecture, that when I reach out to God, I get helped in so abundantly. So Islam is built on the foundations of the rights and responsibilities of human beings towards one another. At its core is the idea that humanity cannot reach its pinnacle of success in this world and in the next without dispensing the basics of justice. Integral to the rights of an individual is not just the duty to educate oneself, but is the responsibility to educate oneself to better society. In an increasingly selfish, polarized, and even narcissistic world, we are taught in Islam to 1, educate ourselves and seek out knowledge to the ends of the earth, and 2, to educate ourselves in order to serve and improve the world in which we live in, to educate ourselves to serve humanity. I'd like to circle back to the verse of the Quran which I mentioned earlier, Rabbi zidni ilma, as an example of the importance that the Quran attaches to the acquirement of knowledge. Even the Holy Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, who is referred to as Ilm al-Awwalin wal-Akhirin, is taught to pray that his knowledge may be increased through this Quranic prayer. He is further reported to have said, seek knowledge though it may be found in a country as far away as China. So this verse also implies that there are 2 types of knowledge that a person should try and acquire. The first is divine teachings as taught through the Holy Quran, and the second, that knowledge which humans acquire with their own efforts and labor. So as Ahmadi Muslims, we are blessed with the Waqf-e-Noor scheme, where individuals from childhood are brought up with the principle and values that they must educate themselves in order to serve humanity. That education is the vehicle of change, and that it is through education, both worldly and spiritual, that we can make progress and leave a long-lasting positive legacy for future generations. Thus, it's safe to conclude that gaining worldly knowledge without gaining and understanding religious knowledge is like an empty pearl shell. There must be a balance in life, for there is nothing worse than an educated individual walking in the dark. And the key to alleviating the injustices of this world is not education for mere personal and materialistic gain, but attaining knowledge and education and skills for the greater good. I would like to end this very short presentation by reading an excerpt of an address given by Huzur Aqdas at the UNESCO headquarters in 2019. Huzur said, true Muslims firmly believe that all humans are born equal, and that regardless of differences of belief, the values of mutual respect and tolerance must be firmly embedded within society. In addition, the Prophet of Islam ﷺ, established an excellent education system through which the intellectual standards of that society were raised. Literate and well-educated people were instructed to teach the illiterate. Special measures were put into place to provide education to orphans and other vulnerable members of society. This was all done so that the weak and powerless could stand on their own 2 feet and advance. And I would really urge everybody to listen to this address. So it's the UNESCO address that Huzur gave in 2019, or even read it. Finally, we live in a time of the jihad of the pen. There has never been a time in the history of the world when there has been a greater need for men and women to be educated and enlightened, to take arms through their education and fight injustice and inequality. Thank you, Jazakallah.
Jazakallah, Sophia Cyber, very useful context that you've given there about the importance that Islam lays in regard to education, and also obviously which inspired many other cultures and faiths even around the world to pay more attention to the importance of learning. I think that really leads nicely into the next part of the program, which is setting the scene about the UK education system. You've obviously mentioned about the importance of religious and secular education, but if you can just focus more on the secular aspect for the next part of the discussion. So Rameen Cyber, if I could please bring you into this part of the discussion. Are you please able to give a brief overview of what the education system in the UK specifically looks like?
Yeah, so assalamu alaikum. So A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. So I think, as Sophia Cyber alluded, we're fortunate to have a very excellent educational system here in the UK. And I think that's something, beloved Huzur Aqdas and Dala bin Nazir Aziz has, repeatedly reminded us as well that, we need to take advantage of these facilities. So the education system is compulsory in this country, but it's also freely available for students between the ages of 5 and 16. You can split the compulsory part of education into two parts. So you've got the primary school, and then you've got secondary school. So primary school is for those students between the ages of 5 and 11, and then secondary school for those years afterwards. And you have two types of schools. So you have state schools and you have private or independent schools. So state schools is, as the name suggests, it's provided by the state. It's freely available. That's where the majority of students will go. But you also have private or independent schools where those who want to can pay additional fees, and then they get a similar form of education. So primary school starts from the ages of 5 onwards. Prior to primary school, you also have optional. You have some options. So parents can enroll their children into nursery and then reception year, which is the year just before primary school formally starts. But once primary school started from the ages of 5, primary school is split into 6 year groups, you can say. So the first 2 year groups, years 1 and 2, is what forms part of infant school and what is part of what's described as key stage 1. And then the subsequent years, 3, 4, 5, and 6, form part of junior school. And then after primary school, you have secondary school. So this is, from the ages of 11 to 16. And, you can, split state schools into two types of schools. So you've got comprehensive schools, which are, it's freely available and everyone can access it. But you also have something called grammar and secondary modern schools as well, which are selective. They tend to be more selective. So they tend to have something called, this is where people might have heard the term 11 plus, where they have a selection criteria to do it. But, again, majority of children will go to study in comprehensive school. So secondary school consists of 5 years, where the first 3 years, years 7, 8, and 9, will focus on key stage 3. This is where, children will start, focusing just beyond the core subjects of maths, science, and English. They'll look at some other subjects as well. And then in the later years of secondary school, in years 10 and 11, that's when they'll start their GCSE, and in year 11 they'll take the GCSE exams. And these are the first major exams that they'll take. For GCSEs, students will pick in the region of like 9, 10 different subjects, where certain compulsory subjects like English, maths, and sciences, but then they have a free choice in lots of other subjects. And GCSEs, they're graded from between the level 9, which is the highest, down to level 1. Yes, so those of us who are used to the older system where we had A star, A's, and B's, and so on, this is now being replaced by this number system where 9 is the highest, where 9 is like slightly higher than the old A star system, and 8 is slightly low. It's still equivalent to like the A star, but slightly lower, and then obviously lower numbers. And then after this stage, this is where children have, or students have, further options of what they want to do in further education. So the more traditional route is those who want to continue their formal education is to go into a sixth form, which might be part of their secondary school or a separate college, and do A levels. In A levels, you'll pick usually 3 or 4 subjects. This is where you start picking the subjects that you're more stronger in, the ones you enjoy more, or you might thinking about university and what subjects you might want to do. So this is for 2 years. Alternatively, if there's something that's become increasingly more popular is more vocational courses. So these are things like BTEC and the newly introduced T levels as well. So these are for those people who perhaps might have an eye on what sort of career they might want to go to, or they might prefer the more vocational form of education. So this offers a more sort of practical, real world basis of learning skills. So it's less about the classroom and more really about learning skill set. And again, this is similarly for 2 years. Or the third option, those who don't want to sort of continue the formal education, they can also take apprenticeships, which are also part of the education system. So apprentices, they're a contract between you and an employer. But this is where you'll get paid, and this is where you'll also have a part of education as well, where you might go to college 1 or 2 days a week for that. And then sort of moving on for that, so those who want to go into further education, they can go into higher education. This is where they'll go into to universities. So this is people who've usually done A levels or BTECs and T levels. They can go into university. And this is where a student will pick one subject to study for 3 or 4 years in an undergraduate degree or a bachelor's degree. This is where the cost of studying comes into it a bit. So so most courses, they cost just over £9,000 a year, but you do have student finance available for that. And then those who want to study even further, after the undergraduate or bachelor's degree, you can study for another 1 or 2 years as a master's. And what the next step after that is to do a PhD, which can take somewhere between 4 and 7 years as well.
Lugman for a very comprehensive overview. Now, obviously, in terms of when we are normally thinking about education in school, we often think of it in terms of doing the school run in the morning, having break and lunch times, students moving between classrooms. And obviously, in the last effectively 10 or 11 months, that hasn't been the case in most schools. We obviously are in another lockdown situation where a lot of students have had to work and learn from home. So I'd like to just bring you in here, Shoaib, if that's okay, in terms of with the pandemic and with the lockdown situation that we're all in at the moment, what would you say the impact that has actually had on learning? What have been the benefits of it, looking at it positively, but also what would you say have been some of the challenges?
Yeah, and it's Rameen Rahim. As you said, I mean, we're now 10 months in since when the lockdown initially began. And if we think about 10 months ago, when in approximately March time, when it all began, students obviously were at home, and at the beginning, obviously teachers were getting used to obviously the new style of teaching, and students were probably getting a mixture of maybe some online learning and maybe work that was set at home. So there was a little bit of a balance going on there, and it was all new from both teacher perspective and from student perspective. Moving 10 months on now, we're now at a point where majority of schools are now moved on to mainly online teaching now. So obviously, as you said, completely different from the classroom environment where students are logging in early morning and pretty much sitting in front of a laptop most of the day. Some schools obviously having all live lessons, where some schools have adopted the idea of we're doing still a mixture of online learning and as well as setting work at home. And this is obviously something students obviously are not used to. It's not the norm for them. They're used to, as you said, the classroom environment, mixing with people, talking to students, having the breaks. As well as obviously education. There is the other pastoral side of education as well, and the idea of socializing that they get to do. And obviously, this is now all kind of being ripped away from them, and they're now sitting solely just in front of a screen. And months ago, March, April, it might have been, it was new. Students were kind of getting used to it. It was fresh, new way of learning, and we were all adapting to it. But it's getting to a point where students are now starting to feel quite a few challenges now. There's obviously many challenges. I mean, if you think about it, every student have got all sorts of things going on in their home, their family environment, where they're living. There might be obviously some disadvantages that they have at home, etc. And one of the big challenges that I think a lot of students are having is just connecting to the online lessons. As I said, all schools are kind of moving towards that, but we think in this day and age and living in the UK, as I think it was mentioned before, you'd think that most people have got laptops, computers, internet. You know, you'd think that this is just like your everyday thing, just like we'd have food in our kitchen. But it's not really until this all kind of kicked off that we've started to realise that that isn't the case. There are many students that do not have internet access. There are students that don't have laptops. Most students are, some students are using their phones to connect into their live lessons. And, you know, you could imagine looking at a screen from 9 o'clock to 3 o'clock, a small screen, all day long, and having to interact with that, having to learn from that. I mean, it's just not realistic. And you know, the frustration that students are having through this, you know, imagine if your internet went down even just for half an hour, you know, we feel a little panic, and you don't realize how many things are running off the internet. If you think about your computers, your laptops, your phones, sometimes some people's TVs, a lot of people have smart homes. All of that is really reliant on the internet. And it wasn't until I guess this that a lot of people are running through their Wi-Fi connections, and what's starting to happen is people are unable to connect now. And that has really built up a frustration in students. They're not able to connect. They're not able to know what's happening in the live lessons. And what's happening is that they feel that they're having to do a lot of catch up. So it's this idea that we think in school it's 9 to 3, but what's happening now, it's more turning into a 9 to 5 or a 9 to 6 now, where students are having to do the online lessons and then also have to think about, okay, the homework, etc., or the things that I missed because I wasn't able to get online. And what's happening is students are struggling to manage their time in the day. So what's happening is they're starting to feel this lack of motivation as well now. They're feeling that it's like a groundhog day where every day seems to be the same. Monday morning, same thing, tutor, lessons. They get the small break and lunch, but then straight after school finishes, they got to go into their homework, and they haven't moved. They're still in that same environment. Whereas if they're in school, they have that little break. They have that different outlook. They're coming to the home, etc. You know, they're seeing different people, but this seems to be quite repetitive then, and they are really struggling on how to manage their time. Even as we said, and if you think about it, when it comes to the weekend, you think, okay, it's a weekend, let's have a break. Well, for them, it's not that. They're still in that same environment. They're still sitting in front of the same computer. They're still in the same room, the same forms. So it is becoming a bit of an issue now for students. And one of the things I kind of recommend them to do is trying to think about planning their days perhaps now. It's very easy to sit in front of a computer all day. You know, you can quite easily do that. And what tends to happen is as the day goes on, something that should take you maybe 10 minutes starts to become a half an hour work, takes an hour to do because you're just sitting there sort of thing. And it just becomes very frustrating for them to get through. So plan the day, think about, okay, I've got work to do. Take regular breaks. When school finishes, don't obviously go straight into your homework. Perhaps maybe take like an hour break or something. Do something else. I think the other thing that's sort of happening is that people are going from their laptops and then they think, okay, I'll just jump on my phone, and that's my kind of timeout. But you're just going from one digital device to another digital device, or they might go to their TV. Well, that's another digital device, and that's what they're not recognizing. That all you're doing is pretty much the same thing. So I strongly suggest that you've got to start thinking about doing other things. And I strongly suggest off a digital device. Think about things that you may have never done before, that you've always wanted to do, and think, okay, I've never had time. Well, now's your chance. And these are one of the benefits that we can take from this. That fine, we may have not had time. We're busy in our lives, etc. But now we do have that little bit of extra time. So think about all those things that you might be wanting to do, and you know what, give it a go. Basically, don't feel that you can't. I think saying excuses that you can't do it now, well, I think that's sort of taken away now, and I think you can actually think about what you want to do.
No, absolutely. No, Jazakallah, Shabsab, obviously very useful teacher insights there as well, and advice that you've given there, which I'm sure we'll have time for a bit later on in the program. Now, obviously, I'd like to bring in here Rameen and Taha more specifically, because obviously you guys were very much at the center of the cancellation of examinations last year, hit the hardest, you could say, at probably arguably the most critical stage of your education, when you were perhaps looking forward to doing your examinations. You spent almost 2 years preparing for this moment. And then and then suddenly cancellation of examinations took place. So what I'm keen to know from both of you, maybe Rameen Cyber, if you can start with yourself. I mean, can you maybe share a bit of some insights and your own experiences of when a decision was made to go into lockdown and the effect that had on your education? What were your thoughts at the time, and how did you still motivate yourself to work hard?
Assalamu alaikum. So so in the beginning, I think there were a few challenges. There were quite a lot of challenges, and it was quite hard to stay organized because it was a new situation for everyone. So even the teachers didn't know what was going to happen, and the children, obviously, they didn't know what was going to happen either. So it was all very unknown and uncertain. I think as times come, as we have proceeded forward, there have been more clarity, and teachers are now more accessible through Teams and emails, and even teachers understanding that there are these challenges that we're facing, and it's quite there has been a considerable progress since the first lockdown. And I think what we can take from this is that no matter what comes our way, the fact that teachers and everyone, our family and our friends, they were all so supportive. That was quite valuable in such a time, and it was quite commendable to see, how even now the teachers, they're trying to accommodate online lessons for us, and our family are so supportive as well. And I think because of this support and all of this encouragement from others, that is really motivating for me personally. And when there have been challenges, so for example, the other day my Wi-Fi was a bit down, but the teachers were understanding that the teacher understood that, and they were supporting of that. So I think that is really valuable in a teacher and student relation. And I think even because of the lockdown, I've had opportunity to take part in other things as well. So because there hasn't been, the urge to kind of get ready in the morning quite early because of going, the traveling time, there's no traveling time that we have to consider. Because of that, there's been more time on my hands. So I've been able to, engage with the Talim classes, for instance, and learn about different things as well that, were not specifically part of my curriculum. So I think there have been ups and downs, but wherever there is a will, there is a way to find out what we want to do. So in a nutshell, I think no matter what comes our way, we can still continue learning if we have the will to do so.
Very much. Thank you for sharing your tips there also. Taha, likewise, I mean, how would you say you kept up your motivation levels, bearing in mind that I'm sure that you were looking forward to shining in the A-level examinations, and that was supposed taken away from you, and then your grades were based upon, as with Rameen Cyber's, on teacher assessment. So it's a slightly different way in which the grades were awarded last summer, and possibly again this summer as well. So again, what would you say your experience was like last year, and what advice would you give students who will be in a very similar situation to you were last year?
Assalamu alaikum. So for me, at the very start of lockdown, that was probably the hardest because when it was first announced, none of us knew what was going on, and the first few days we sort of realized that our normal school routine, which was like from 8 o'clock to 4 p.m., that wasn't there anymore, and that's why I really struggled because my brain was normally most active in those hours. And working outside those hours was sort of quite unknown to me. So what I started doing firstly was I started to mirror my school routine at home. So I would get up at the same time I would for school because I knew that's when I would be working at my hardest. I think that was quite important for me in the first few weeks. And what I did was I created the same sort of learning environment in my own home. So during those hours I would have school, I would take away all the distractions that I would have, like my phone or anything like that, and also create a different environment that I would relax in, which I would have done at school, for example, at a break and lunch. And that, I think, really motivated me because it didn't feel as much of a change as I was sort of sticking to the same routine as I was at school. So that's something I would recommend to other people. And also, at the start of the lockdown, a lot of the uncertainty was that we might have gaps in our learning because we don't have that personal contact with the teachers. So I would recommend through email, or especially through email, that's how I did it, you should reach out to your teachers or other friends because you don't want any gap in your learning, because that one gap in learning can cause you to lose multiple marks in an exam, and you want to make sure that you completely understand all the concepts. As the lockdown went on, I quickly noticed that I sort of developed those sort of skills involving independent learning, because when lockdown was there for us, we didn't really have classes, but we were just given tasks, and a lot of it we had to self-teach ourselves. And while doing that, that also helped me in my time management, and I think that's really important, going to be throughout your whole career, about how you manage time. And lastly, as was mentioned before, this idea of taking breaks, I think that's incredibly important, because 20 minutes of work without distractions, and if you take a break between that, I feel that you can concentrate much better. That's all I have to say.
No, thank you very much. I think you've touched upon another really important dimension about independent learning, and how there was more of an expectation, almost by necessity rather than choice, for students to learn on their own. I think Shoaib also mentioned about the challenges with having access to digital resources. We often assume that just because we are in a developed country, that all of our families, all of our children have these devices at home, and that's not the case at all. So that's a very real situation, challenge that we face here. But one thing that we haven't really mentioned so far in the program is the impact on primary education. I'm just reading a comment on YouTube from Sadia Sahiba, who talks about the importance of instilling passion for learning, and so that can inspire students to learn independently. Sophia, so maybe that's a bit more challenging at primary level. Would you agree, in terms of how there's much more of a reliance of students to be with their teachers, to have more sort of direct one-to-one support? So
I mean, the whole thing about primary school is that the age ranges from 3 to 11, and so there's such a disparity in levels of independence and actual ability that if you think about it, when a child starts in nursery and reception, they're 3, 4, 5 years old. Not all of them are even toilet trained, and these are the things that the youngest children regress in. And I think one of the things that the whole pandemic has highlighted is the inequalities in society. And my learned colleagues have just said the whole economic deprivation, vulnerable children, families, laptop availability, Wi-Fi availability is really highlighted these things, these elements. And then on the other side, it's all the issues and challenges you have as a teacher in class anyway, and then take that into the home situation, and it's exacerbated. I mean, the first question that I was going to look at here was, how has primary education changed during lockdown? And I think what hasn't changed during lockdown, what hasn't changed in the last year, life has changed. But I think the most obvious group of people that have been affected in society has been children, young people, and their education. During the first lockdown, there wasn't a push on primary schools teaching via online platforms. Secondary schools caught on very quickly to that, some secondary schools. I have to put a caveat here. There wasn't in the first lockdown, and there still isn't. And my consultancy work enables me to talk to lots of families and to teachers. And there's no uniformity. There isn't a base. There might be a baseline, but everyone isn't compelled. Every school isn't compelled to do the same thing, the same standard. So even in primary schools, you will have schools now where they didn't have to do online learning before. Now some schools will teach live lessons for 2-3 hours. Some will do pre-recorded lessons just for maths and English, 20-minute segments. You have to bear in mind, primary school children can't sit still. So if you have a 30-minute recorded lesson, I've got 4 children. One has graduated, and then three are in primary school. One has EHCP, so he has help. He has dyslexia, and then I have twins. And so in our situation, we are very privileged in many ways. But imagine that situation. One laptop, if you're lucky, is given. Laptops were not given out by the government on a timely fashion. One laptop for 3 or 4 children. So one child can access the laptop, the other 2 can't. And parents, they have their own skill sets, but they're not trained to be teachers. So it's really highlighted the disparities, I think, in society. Another thing that teachers have said to me, my teacher friends have said to me, don't forget to tell everybody schools have been open from the beginning. and they have been open to children with special needs. They've been open to the children of critical workers, frontliners, and to actually children of parents who absolutely have no choice but to go out to work because they get paid on minimum wage on a cash basis sometimes, and they cannot leave their young children at home. So schools have been open, but now what you see is that there's more there's been more of a plan. Schools understand what they have to do. So, for example, one teacher was saying she's in school doing live face-to-face teaching for 1 week, and then for the second week she's teaching online. But what she has said is that her hours of work have extended, and I think you just said that as well. That she's now teaching from very early in the morning, 8:30, 9. And then the teaching and the interacting and the marking is going on till 4 or 5, and then she's starting to plan again. And the actual recording of lessons is really laborious. And what we have to understand is not all teachers were au fait with technology. We have generation gaps within teachers as well. So we've got teachers who are, yes, in their early 20s, but we've also got teachers who are in their 50s. And so their knowledge, their skill set is really different. And everybody keeps talking about the new normal, but in terms of primary school teaching, I think that primary schools are still finding their own, still trying to find their feet. And the biggest thing I think for primary schools that parents and children have found is the social element, or the lack thereof. Talking to your peers, something that's been highlighted again and again is that not everybody has a garden. So it's all very well, to say go and get some fresh air, but for some children, that's literally opening a window in their bedroom. That's their fresh air. So it's thinking outside the box. And I think the frustration for teachers and for parents has been that we've had 10, 11 months to plan this, and still we're not all boroughs are on top of it, not all schools are on top of it, and there needs to be more done, particularly to protect vulnerable children. And I think we've already talked about, the lack of laptops and all of that, and that kind of thing. I mean, in addition to live teaching, I think we have to think about the impact on attainment. It will be huge because early years teaching in primary school, they're the formative years in terms of, your brain, a child's brain developing. By the time they get to secondary school, you're going to be building blocks. There'll be building blocks on what their strengths are, but primary school is crucial. However, when I talk to parents, and I'll talk about this in a minute, I tell them that they have to just relax because the whole world is in the same position, and it really is what it is. And I've talked about the teacher perspective. Schools haven't been closed, and teachers really, really, passionate about saying that they're still working, and they haven't. Some are saying they've never worked so hard, and they've highlighted the fact that it's so hard to differentiate to meet all needs in a live lesson, because when you're face to face with a child, they can put their hand up. You have that interaction, that human contact. It's almost impossible for primary school, particularly Key Stage 1. And year 6, they're moving on to year 7, secondary school. They're far more independent if they are neurotypical and they have the ability to be independent. But as you said, that there's been a huge impact on SEND students, special educational needs students. In the first lockdown, there was such a lack of information by local authorities. And then, for example, year groups like year 5 going into 6, where they were having to make secondary school choices. Secondary schools were closed. There was no contact. So they were having to make lists of schools when they hadn't even talked to SENCOs and teachers. So there has been a real lack of information. It's been a steamroller. So the whole movement and process of education has been, it could be equated to that of a steamroller. Very slow, maybe steady in some cases, but I think in many cases not quick enough. And Ofsted, very early on, Ofsted could see, and Ofsted, when they're a bit of an enemy when it comes to the teacher, but when you're in leadership and you do understand, and when you're in policy making and government, you understand that there's a need to regulate, everything, and education is also one of those things that you have to have a baseline where you assess. And Ofsted very early on started talking to families who are affected by special needs, And they said that across all age groups, children with SEND have been seriously affected in both their care and education, as the services that families relied on, particularly speech and language services, were unavailable. Again, with regard to this and the pandemic, Ofsted said many of the families and survey respondents found the first national COVID-19 restrictions challenging, and said coping got harder as time went on. Parents and carers who've normally relied on established routines, informal and family support networks were not able to rely on these. I've got other points, but I'm just very wary of time and I don't want to hog.
No, I think you've been very helpful in terms of giving us a wider context.
Can I just give a few tips to parents, because I'm really aware that
that's exactly what I was going to ask.
Yeah, I was just, because I've put this out to parent groups, and that is the question that lots of parents are talking about. And I think you need to look after yourself as a parent and a carer. Look after your own mental health and don't be hard on yourself. It's nigh on impossible to emulate and duplicate a classroom situation at home. So I don't think you should try. Parents have to be really realistic. I am a teacher. I have children and I teach them maths and English for 40 minutes a day. 20 minutes of that is a recorded session from their school. And I will dip into other subjects if I think they can cope with it. Don't expect a school timetable, but do have a routine and structure. My children, I make them wake up early. I make them wake up by, it's a bit mean, but I do try and get them out of bed by 8. And I absolutely insist that they have to change out of their pajamas. So they have to have this, and it's really, you think that these are small things, but they really do. And as Taha said, that he, in the beginning, the first lockdown, he found that it was really useful for him to wake up and try and duplicate his school timetable. It's really important not to duplicate the school timetable or even a school setting, but routine is crucial. And as you've heard, and particularly it's really important, every human being learns in a different way. And I said earlier, you can't just do writing and sitting at a desk, and please don't expect that. And don't expect that you can, make a child sit down and then they're going to become independent because you tell them that they have to become an independent learner. We all have different types of learning styles. And I'm sure other people will talk about it, but every human being is equipped with a VARC. So either you're a visual learner, kinesthetic, so you use all your senses. And particularly with primary school children, I would suggest that you make your activities really hands-on. So for example, if you're looking at measuring, get out things in your house, in your kitchen, get your weighing scales out, start cooking with your children. I know it's not relevant to higher education. It may well be, depending on what your skill set is, but I think making it hands-on, incorporating designing technology, are really focusing on how you can think outside the box. And in the first lockdown, this is what the SEND team really focused on. And what we did was that we would throw out ideas on a Monday morning to the parents, and we would say, actually, this week we're going to look at the Hajj, and then we're going to incorporate shape, lines of symmetry, 3D shapes, 2D shapes. We're going to look at history. We're going to look at the history of Islam. Geography will be the continents, because we're going to look at Saudi Arabia. We're going to look at the Hajj and the Hijrah. So thinking outside the box, and trying to make use of understanding that every learner is different, and that and not getting frustrated is really important. As I said, I focus on, and I suggest that teachers keep it really short and sharp for primary school children. Actually, I think 20 minutes is too long for a pre-recorded session. I would do a 10-minute, a 12-minute session where I expect children to learn one skill. In a classroom, in a live lesson with a 45 or 60-minute lesson, you can teach a child 3 or 4 things every day for a week or 2 weeks in a unit of work. It's absolutely impossible this way. And I think that Ofsted and the government and school leaders have to understand this in terms of, what teachers can do. They're not miracle workers. What parents can do and what children can do. It's really important to have breaks. And as a Muslim, as an Ahmadi Muslim, I really focus on Friday, have an end of the week. And on what we do is that I only teach my children for an hour on a Friday, and it's literally times tables tests, spelling tests, something really light. And then we stop for Jummah, and they've learned how to follow in namaz now, which is great, because they couldn't do that before. They're 6 and they're 10. And then what the treat that they have is after Jummah, as soon as they've read their prayers, they're allowed to use their tablets. And they can use their tablets from after Jummah to Sunday. But Monday to Thursday, they can't touch them. And I would suggest that you incorporate treats and rewards in this confined space that you're living. It can be done. And again, I talk from a place of privilege because my children do have tablets and not all families do. And I gave into the idea of tablets only a year ago. But I have been so grateful of this resource. But we have to bear in mind that, economically, we're not all coming from the same place. And again, as I've said, that this pandemic has really highlighted the inequalities in society. Don't overdo technology. Don't overdo treats. And the last thing that I will say is ask for help. Ask for help from your friends, from your family. If you're a parent of a child with special educational needs, ask for help from your local authority. Every special needs child with an EHCP has a caseworker. Reach out to your caseworker. Everybody is working. Everybody has learned that they have to work from home. Every borough has an advisory service. Reach out to them. If someone isn't picking up the phone, leave a message. Talk to your teachers. Talk to your schools. There are days, and I'm sure that my school leadership doesn't like me very much, but there are days where I've had a really hard time. But I am convinced that if I feed back to them, they'll understand how they can improve. And there are days where I email them 4 times a day saying, listen, we had this, we're trying to learn this, and these are the things that we found really difficult. If schools don't know what your problems are, they're not going to improve. Dialogue and voicing your concerns, making your voice heard, that is the most important thing in the world that we're living in at the moment.
Jazakallah. So that was very comprehensive, and I think what you've done there is acknowledge that the challenges that are faced at home by teachers, by young children, by parents also, but also I think more importantly, you've given some really good solutions and strategies for how parents can assist their young children. Shoaib, if I could just turn to you for the next bit. Obviously, as somebody who teaches online and is now used to virtual lessons, what would you say works more effectively? Obviously, it's not the same as being in the classroom, but at a secondary level, what would you say is good, effective practice? And again, what advice would you give to students and parents who might be watching this? I think you're muted. Classic.
Yeah, sorry. It is very difficult. I mean, we are obviously limited to a screen, and that's how most of the teaching is actually given. But there's a lot of tools out there. There is a lot of tools that can be used out there for teachers to give out to students. So it's not just. I think the norm is probably a PowerPoint, and it's either, as was said before, either there's a recorded voice over it, and people are just answering questions, be it from a workbook or just from a PowerPoint. But there are other things that can be used, and as we'll say, that it needs to be a little bit more interactive. I think in the beginning when lockdown started, there was a lot of interactivity when these online classes started. But as time has gone on, it's starting to get quite a bit quiet on the online sessions now. So I think there needs to be other ways to try to engage the students in. So if we're thinking about obviously secondary level, slightly different from I guess the younger primary schools, but there are other tools. There's things like you can do where you can get like online whiteboards, for example. There's a website called whiteboard.fi where students can basically write on the whiteboard on the screen, and the teacher can see everybody's screen. And so that it just makes it a little bit different from writing from your normal textbook, pen and paper. So it slightly changes that, and makes it a little bit more exciting. The students like to write on there, and you, as a teacher, you can see what they're doing. So if it was like a maths lesson, the teacher can see them showing their working out, etc., how they got to the answers, and then they can then share that back to the students, which makes it a bit more effective. There's also things like also make it fun as well. Sometimes it gets a little bit too serious where, it's very textual based, learn this, learn that, advantage, disadvantage, etc., things like that. Make it interesting. I mean, there's something called Kahoot, for example, which is like an online quiz, which I think has been used in some Jamaat events as well, sort of thing. It just breaks it up a little bit. Kids like the whole interactive. They like competition, for example, but make it in a fun way. Kids are going on, they're trying to answer in a short time. teachers' perspective, they're getting their education across, student side of it, they get to have something fun, but also they're doing the learning at the other side sort of thing. So there are other tools that we need to think about, but as I said, as was said before, they need students need to kind of interact with their teachers. Unless you tell the teachers what's going on, the difficulties you're having, the teachers won't know, and therefore won't be able to change the way things are being done. So communication is so key, and therefore that way the teachers can then obviously adapt and change things obviously to the needs of the students, which I think will make such a big difference.
Yeah, I think just on the back of what you've just said there, and also Sophia Cyber, I think a problem shared is a problem halved. And unless you communicate what challenges are, what the issues you're facing at home are honestly to your teachers and to your schools, everyone's going to assume that you do have digital access. There are no issues or obstacles to accessing online learning. And I think what you said about keeping the human touch is extremely important. And I always come back to one of my favorite quotes of an educational consultant by the name of Mary Myatt, who says that just bear in mind when you are interacting with the children, they're humans first and learners second. I think we sometimes forget that yes, education is about academic progress, but also about well-being. And I think it's acknowledging that that having that space at home, having an emphasis on good physical health, good mental health, can often be forgotten, especially in maybe a culture like ours, possibly. And what I want to turn on to next is looking at another question, which often does come up, especially when the time for examinations is imminent. And it is a question of whether Ahmadi students, if they are preparing for GCSE examinations or A-level examinations, for instance, and if they've had some involvement in the Jamaat, what should take priority, and is it still manageable to commit to your Jamaat responsibilities at the same time as preparing for examinations, for instance? So Rameen Cyber, I'd like to bring you in here. Also, I know that, mashallah, you're very active on a number of fronts within the Jamaat, but also you're very, mashallah, very successful student. So what would you say has been the key to your success, and what advice would you give to a student who's coming up with this struggle of whether to do Jamaat work or not during their studies?
Jazakallah. So I think it's imperative that we do strike a balance between the two, because it's not just that we can't leave out the Jamaat duties or we can't leave out our secular education. So it all comes down to, being able to manage our time wisely and having good organization skills. And I think, being involved in the Jamaat, personally, it has helped me a lot. So I've been able to gather a lot of transferable skills like communication, research, that has helped me in my secular education as well. And I think it quite magically, it all just seems to fall into place. And, and above all, that feeling that, you're helping someone, you're helping the Jamaat, that can be quite reassuring, and it's just unparalleled by any other. So I think you can definitely, organize your time well by creating schedules and sticking to a routine. So by having that routine, we can factor in time where we can help the Jamaat. And as has been mentioned, it's important to have breaks. So when you're studying, that can be quite, academically challenging. It could be quite tiring as well. So you can have occasional breaks in which you can do other activities, which could be, for example, helping the Jamaat or going outside, exercising and all that stuff. So I think it's important that we understand, it's not about just leaving one or the other, but it's about doing both of them together, and it's definitely manageable, I'd say.
Taha, would you agree with that?
Well, when serving the Jamaat, of course you get countless blessings, but I think also as you get older into sort of A-level years, you realize how important time management is. And if you get into the habit of keeping the balance between serving the Jamaat and doing your education, that skill of time management, it's almost it factors into your own personality. I think that's really important. And when you are doing serving the Jamaat, there are so many skills. For example, I've gained skills in sort of leadership and teamwork. And
Right.
When you are, for example, applying to uni and future in your career, that is the skills they're looking for as well as the grades. I think so. You would get the countless blessings from serving the Jamaat, but also help you in the future in your path to university or your future career.
No, absolutely. And obviously, Luqman Saib, if I bring you in here in terms of your involvement with the Umur Tullaba, you must get this question and challenge all the time. So again, what would be your advice to students who are in that situation where they're being asked to do work in the Jamaat, but also they've got their preparations for their examinations also?
So I think the previous two have articulated the points really, really well. I think the way you should really look at it is that the Jamaat activities complements your studies side by side. And again, this is something Hazur Aqdas has, said time and time again. You've got to do along with your secular studies, you've also got to, these Jamaat activities are really vital for your moral and spiritual journey as well. And I think Rameen Cyber, she made the point about, you learn a lot of good timekeeping skills. Often it is possible to balance the two. And the reason why people struggle is because they've not quite yet developed that skill. And, I've grown up where, I've seen Guideen who are doing A-levels or, university students. I think when I was at university, one of my university members, he was a guide and another one was a Sadr of Jamaat. And you see National Army members and, various people, various high roles who are doing balancing the two. So I do think the two can complement each other. But the one caveat I would say is, when it does come to those exam periods, and you do need to focus a little bit more for the exams, it is okay to sort of not leave it completely, but to sort of, speak to various people, whether it's your guides, Ayman Sarallah, or, whoever you need to speak to, well, be more Sadr or Sadr Cyber, then say you explain the situation, and more often than not, people will always be understanding that if you've got exam period, you do need to back off a little bit, you need to focus a little bit more on revision, and that is something everyone always allows in those situations. But that's though we're talking about certain periods of part of the year. For the rest of the year, I think like the previous two students have said, it's a wonderful. It complements your studies wonderfully in that respect.
Just conscious of time, we've got about 4 minutes remaining, and we've obviously covered lots of ground in relation to a number of issues, parenting and the challenges of supporting children with special educational needs, to the importance of well-being and accessing remote learning generally. So just want to invite each of our panelists today to just share one takeaway point or golden nugget that our viewers can take away from today's discussions. So if I could start with you, Sophia Cyber, just very briefly in about 20 to 30 seconds, what would you say is your key bit of advice?
My key advice is to breathe, take it easy, take a step back, and just know that the whole world is in the same position. So not to give yourself or your children a hard time, or your teachers.
Very important too. Taha Saib?
For me, my final point would be, in order to maintain that positive attitude when in lockdown, is doing work in short bursts. For example, 20 minutes of work with maximum concentration is much better than 1 hour of work where you're distracted the whole time. So I think it's important to have short bursts and have regular breaks to keep you motivated.
Very important. Shoaib Saib? Again, you're on mute.
Sorry, take this also as an opportunity as well. So, obviously the secular side of it, but also use this time to do those things that you always put off and you thought you would never do. Use this time to maybe start those things and come out of it thinking this year that, what, I learned something, or I gained a new skill, or I did something. So don't feel that, take this away as just a negative year. Bring something positive out of it.
Luqman Sahib?
Yeah, no, I'd say, just to echo the previous points, I'd also say, do embrace this situation. This is still a very special time for students in your education. It's still potentially a very exciting part of your life. So do try and enjoy it as much as possible. Find the things that you enjoy most out of it. And like I said, do try and balance your moral and spiritual obligations along with your secular knowledge as well.
And last but not least, Rameen Cyber.
I think my advice would be to combine hard work and prayers, and also, write to beloved Hazur, because that can make us feel reassured and peace at heart. And I think always look towards, seeking comfort in prayers, because prayers have the power to change the impossible into possible. Exactly.
I think it's a perfect point to end with. My thanks and gratitude to our speakers and panelists today, and also our viewers for joining. I'm sure you found the contributions and insights of our speakers enlightening and invaluable today. And just to emphasize also that any views expressed today are personal and don't reflect the views of the Ahmadiyya Muslim Association. Please don't forget that we also have in 15 minutes our next forum for today, which is Motivation Matters. Please look at the link here on the Talim channel for further details. I'm delighted to say we're joined by National Secretary of Talim, Nadeem Rameen Cyber. If I could please hand over to him for any final comments and to lead us in dua, please.
Excellent. Thank you very much, everybody. And mashallah, what a intense and excellent program. I was definitely interested while watching. Like you've said, Waqar Saab, thank you to yourself, Taha, Luqman, and Shoaib, and obviously to Rameen and Sophia Cyber, who have actually come in, spent their valuable time sharing their expertise to everybody. Most of all, thank you to all the guests and the viewers who have taken the time as well and viewed this. Please share your comments and tell us what you think of this format. It's different to our lectures, something we're trying out. Do let us know what you think of it, whether we should do more programs like this. I would end by just asking everybody if you could join me in silent prayer, then we can conclude this session. Please join me. Ameen, so Ameen. Jazakallah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Assalamu alaikum.